Hello and welcome to Pop Screen, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We are Geek Show's podcast dedicated to the good, the bad and the bewildering of movies, either by, starring or about pop stars. The podcast covers such a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm Graham Williamson. I'm a film critic for thegeekshow.co.uk and horrified.com. And this week I've been joined by...
Ben Pilmer, a training and consultancy business manager in healthcare.
I always feel slightly inferior when I introduce you, and you've done that, and I've mainly just sort of written about films. Still living.
Comparable, absolutely comparable.
Well, it was too late to tag on an Avengers-style post-credit sequence, but just 2 months after the US release of this week's film Get On Up, Chadwick Boseman was announced to play Black Panther in the Marvel film of the same title, and so began the fastest ascent to legendary status an actor has enjoyed since James Dean. As far as superheroes go, though, he'd already played one larger-than-life character in a cape with a whole X-Men battalion full of aliases: Mr. Dynamite, the Godfather of Soul, the hardest working man in show business, James Brown. That biopic, Get On Up, is the subject of today's episode. And I just want to start off by asking, what would you say you look for in a biopic?
Oh, good question. I would say I like a biopic to be pretty accurate. I think that's probably the one thing I liked, because I don't like to see something that I actually really enjoy and be shocked by or really resonate with, only to then I'm the typical, I'm gonna search Google for this now because I need to know that this is true.
Yeah.
I don't want to be moved in that way, only to then find out that actually it's not right. So I like it to be accurate, and then whilst I'm watching or afterwards when I go down the rabbit hole, read a little bit more into it, understand the context a little bit more, all those type of things.
See, I think it's kind of a trade-off. I mean, on the one hand, I think a biopic should work just like any standard story. And there's a part of me that says, if I would watch this and be satisfied with it, even if this story was completely fictional, it works. But on the other hand, I kind of like stories that are a bit stranger than fiction as well. I think my gold standard for a biopic is probably, have you ever seen Tim Burton's film, Ed Wood?
No, I haven't. I have heard good things about it, though.
Ed Wood is absolutely my favourite Tim Burton film, and just a wonderful film altogether. But it has that balance where if you were sitting down to write a fiction screenplay, you wouldn't write this. It is too strange. But if for some reason you were writing it, I'd like to think that you would structure it this way and end it at this point, because it has a satisfying fictional shape, which I think, I had seen Get On Up before, and I remember when I saw it, my main two reactions were, hey, that guy playing James Brown's really good. I'm really looking forward to what he does next. Two, this screenplay structure is driving me up the wall.
Right. Right, interesting. And just on that, did you see Get On Up before or after, I suppose, Black Panther or even a previous work?
It was definitely before Black Panther. I was trying to piece it together. I think By the time it came out in the UK, I knew that he had been cast to play Black Panther, and I'd seen the press about that, but that was 2014. At that point, he hadn't even done the sort of supporting appearance that he has in Captain America Civil War.
Yeah. No, it's just interesting, isn't it? Because I came from the different side. So my first introduction to him as an actor is,
is the Marvel
Civil War
stuff.
Yeah, Civil War, Black Panther, and so then seeing this, it was really interesting to, I suppose, see just such a different side to his repertoire, if you like, and how he plays this sort of character.
It is kind of interesting because I remember thinking about Boseman's screen persona a lot after he died. Partly because I guess during his life I thought, well, I don't know what Chadwick Boseman film is yet because he's just starting. We'll figure that out later, and then you realise that's not going to happen. But it's kind of interesting that this biopic, which is on the one hand saying here is a great man of the music industry, a great recording legend, it's also kind of the least sympathetic character Chadwick Boseman's ever played, really.
That's a really really good point. Yeah, he's probably. I was when I was watching. I watched it again last night, and you don't see an ounce of like you say, just empathy in the character until the very end. And even then, at the very end, you are thinking, is he meaning to be like this? Is he actually saying this? There's that moment, I think, towards the end with Bobby Bird, and you're thinking to yourself, because you can't believe it, because you've basically just watched 2 hours of like you say, just relentless a character that just goes through life thinking about himself and so dedicated to his craft and what he does.
There's this push-pull where sometimes you think that absolute single-mindedness of James Brown is really admirable. I mean, obviously he wouldn't be as good a performer or a recording artist if he didn't have that. But as you say, it does spill over into active mistreatment of a lot of people in his life.
Yeah, I got the sense the film portrayed James Brown to be someone who, if he didn't believe in himself 100% or to the most he possibly could, he would, I suppose, open the floodgates as to what his life was. The early neglect and poverty that he grew up in. The moment he kind of comes down from that, I am James Brown, and referring even to James Brown in the third person, the moment that even if there was a tiny crack in the surface of that, there would be almost a breakdown. That's how it feels to me, because just the conditions in which he grew up in and was around in those days would just be too much for any person or human to deal with.
I think that's probably true, and I wish the film had made the point as clearly as you just have, because I think one of the problems I have with the non-linear structure, which is usually absolutely my thing in movies. I'm a huge Nicholas Roeg fan. I love any film that has kind of a flashback structure or messes about with linear storytelling in any kind of interesting way. This time, it just didn't work for me. And I think if it was done in chronological order, you'd have two things happening. Firstly, that you'd start off with the childhood stuff, which is really good. I think the childhood material is fantastic. But also you would get that sense of unease as it went on. At first you would watch the childhood stuff and you'd be horrified for him, and you'd be happy when he started to make it big, and then you would recognize that his later behavior was really the kind of buried trauma from that sort of working itself out. Whereas in this movie you've got all these maddening cuts, like there's that one scene where he's taping a Christmas special for Frankie Avalon's show.
Yes.
which is a very funny scene, and it has perhaps the funniest line in the film where he says he's in the middle of a honky hoedown. But that has just come off the back of a scene where he's ran away from his abusive father, and you think, not quite ready for the giggle yet. Give me some space.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with that. Actually, it was chaotic, wasn't it? It was. I didn't know where I was when the scene changed. Have I changed to a different time? Am I before? He got big. Am I after he got big? Am I at what part of James Brown's life are we currently looking at? And it was, yeah, and I think that's probably because as it goes back to that early childhood stuff, it seems to hit some points. I can't remember the dates off the top of my head, but for example, it might be 1968, then it goes down to the 1950s, then down into the childhood stuff, and then starts to work itself back up through the years then, doesn't it? It touches on a couple of points coming down and then on multiple points going back up. And so you're trying to piece that together as to where where we're actually looking at. And for me, I wanted to know, like you're saying there, I wanted to know, what was he like when he was first coming through? What then did he become? And was actually, how much did the childhood stuff impact his early career? How much did the undeniable talent and reception that he was getting in his early career impact on who he became in the middle part and towards the end of his career as well? And because of the timeline, I don't think you were able to get a sense of that as much.
It doesn't flow, and it has to resort to an awful lot of sort of things like, again, if it was done chronologically, you could have shown him in, I forget what the name of the group that he was briefly in at the start, something like the Fabulous Flames or something like that. Something like that, but less camp sounding, I think, is but it could have shown you him joining them and then him sort of moving past that and then becoming his backing group, and you would have understood the story. Whereas this has like a scene where a reporter goes, so you started off in a vocal group, and you think, come on, man, you're screenwriters, there's an easier way to do this. And the weirdest thing is, this is written by Jez and John Henry Butterworth, who, Jez Butterworth certainly is one of the hottest playwrights in Britain at the moment. His play Jerusalem, which starred Mark Rylance, was a massive success in the West End. It transferred to Broadway and was just as big a success there. And you look at this and you think, is it just that he's unfamiliar with film form? Is it just that he's writing this stuff and he can't quite envisage what the effect will be of cutting from like 1930s South Carolina to like California in the 70s, that he doesn't get that because he's a creature of the theatre? I don't know.
Yeah, it was Famous Flames. I just had a quick
Famous
check.
Flames, that was it.
Yeah. I got the sense that what they were trying to achieve is, what contributed to the James Brown that we know today. What a way to open the film. I thought, wow, we're straight into it here. And like I say,
it's kind of like the Dog Day Afternoon of funk biopics, isn't it? It's absolutely.
I was thinking, is this something from Quentin Tarantino that I'm watching here? He's incredibly calm whilst walking around with a shotgun.
Yes.
In a group of people. I'm thinking, I'm sure I've tuned into the right film. So yeah, that intrigues you, and it almost kind of goes, right, this is James Brown. You're watching a film about James Brown. Can you believe this is James Brown?
Yeah.
And now we're going to show what built up to this point. And I think the idea was a commendable one. I just don't think that they executed it very well. As we've said, just the chaotic nature of touching on different times before getting back to that more linear chronological progression.
Yeah. And I think if you're going to do something like this, you really have to be a very, very skilled visual stylist as a director. Again, taking it back to Nick Roeg, there are parts of a film like Don't Look Now or The Man Who Fell to Earth that you understand because you can see repeated images and repeated compositions, and it just clicks in your brain, and that carries you through the moments where the narrative is not very clear on paper. I don't think Taylor, who has made some perfectly successful films that people have enjoyed very much, but he is not that guy, really. He's not doing a bad job, but he's not doing the kind of job you have to do to make this kind of project work.
Yeah. I would agree with that. And like I say, just from that beginning point, I think it goes to the show where he's on with the Rolling Stones, a massive point in his career. They get that out of the way pretty quickly. I think then they go to the correct me if I'm wrong, I think they then go to the Vietnam show that he did, and then into the plane. So they are climbing down, going backwards. I think then they go to the early life and then build it back up. And I think to do that, you need to be able to be so engrossed and enjoy those moments before you get to early childhood life, and then almost like the moments, the kind of that's why we saw him at the beginning of the film. That fits now. That makes sense. And I just never got that. It didn't really make sense to me until we were at a point where we could then see the progression and the moment.
I think that Vietnam scene, I'm very glad you raised that, because that is one of the things that hit big now that I'm watching it in retrospect, because I absolutely found it incredibly easy to disconnect Chadwick Boseman's James Brown from Chadwick Boseman's T'Challa, but the Vietnam stuff is so much like The Five Bloods. It's really weird watching it now. And I've been kind of timid about rewatching The Five Bloods because, as a friend pointed out to me, Mark Harrison, who is often on this podcast, Chadwick Boseman's character in that movie already represents like lost potential and lost life. And you think, how much is that going to hurt rewatching it now he's actually dead?
Of course. I mean, we couldn't talk about him without touching upon that, could we? What a shock! We want an absolute and somebody who 100%, in my opinion, was at the start of his career. And you look at him, how he was in the Avengers stuff and the Marvel stuff, but also his back catalogue like this, and just the different things that he was able to bring to the table as an actor. And you thought, this is someone on a trajectory to stardom. There were plenty of main character roles in some big films, I think, that were going to come in the future.
And as we're recording this, he's just won a posthumous Golden Globe. The smart money is on him repeating that trick at the Oscars for Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. It's still a death that makes absolutely no sense. It's still an astonishing thing to think about.
Yeah, and I believe towards the end, he was even working whilst he was ill, wasn't he? I believe that he was still day in, day out, trying to battle through what he had to battle through, and still turning up and doing the thing that he loved. And I think that's why it was again such a shock. There wasn't a long period of time where anyone knew anything was wrong.
No, he kept it absolutely limited to his closest circle right up until his death. And you think, I mean, I don't want to sort of play down the psychological demands of it, but the physical demands of it floor me. That here is someone who's made like 3 Marvel movies and a Spike Lee Vietnam War movie while he is dying of cancer.
Yeah. When you put it like that, especially, you think, it's astounding, isn't it? Absolutely astounding, and nothing but admiration. And God knows just what was going through his mind at the time. But you should look upon all of those, all of those films and the work he did in those. It's flawless. And so to again, whether he was thinking this is what I'm going to leave, this is my legacy, this is what is going to be I'm going to be remembered by. Who knows? But he certainly did a lot to remember him by, which was really good.
I think it must have, when you have a disease like cancer, which works so slowly and gives you so much time to reflect, I think there must be part of you that is thinking in terms of, all right, say it happens tomorrow, what have I left? What can I do that's more than that?
You start to look at your own mortality in a totally different way, don't you?
Yeah. And I think it when it happens, as I've said earlier, it made me look back at his career and try and work out what the sort of threads of it are, because I do honestly believe that in 30, 40 years, people will be like talking about a Chadwick Boseman movie as being something that means something. It's something that is recognizable.
I think so. I've not seen him in a film yet that I've not been impressed by his character, or and the biggest compliment I can give him is I always find that if as an actor you're able to portray different types of characters and from a range of different films, and immediately I don't just spend the entire film going, "You're the guy from Black Panther." Which is quite easily done, isn't it?
It's so easily done with a film that size, and with the Marvel movies, and I suppose with anything that's on that scale, you feel like it's burrowed into your head about like 10 months before it's released. And I had never read a Black Panther comic before that movie came out. And I felt like by the time it was released, I could probably give you a pretty good potted history of how the character was created, because it just gets everywhere. So as you say, to be able to put that down completely, to not think about Wakanda at all when you're watching Get On Up is really something.
Yeah, the biggest compliment you can give, I think.
I think one of the other interesting things about Boseman is how often his screen work keeps going back to African subject matter. I mean, most obviously in Black Panther and its relatives, but also in something like A Message to the King, which is it's an all right movie. It's like a little vigilante thriller that he did on Netflix pretty soon after he was first cast as Black Panther. But it is so unusual in that he is playing a South African character, and he didn't have to play a South African character. And I suspect most American filmmakers would have rather he didn't, and would rather have had, a character which is more tried and tested in that genre of movie. But he did that, and I think it seems like, I don't know exactly how that'll be remembered, but it feels like something that was very different and radical compared with how previous generations of African American film stars presented themselves. I think they could have even done a bit with it in here, because one of James Brown's biggest concerts was at the Rumble in the Jungle, the Ali versus Foreman boxing match in Zaire. Which I think if the film had maybe come out a few years later and there was more of a sense of what a Chadwick Boseman movie was, someone would have said, all right, we've got to take him to Zaire. Yeah, that's a big thing, but it isn't in there, sadly.
I came to the film knowing quite little, so I did my usual. Oh, that was a fantastic film, and I really enjoyed that. And I want to know more about James Brown. So you start doing a little bit of digging, and I was actually quite surprised. I was like, oh, that's a massive part of somebody's career, surely. So it was quite interesting to me that they decided to leave that part out of.
Yeah, there is a whole documentary, I should point out, called Soul Power by Jeff Levy-Hint, which is about that concert and all of the various acts who played it. So if anyone is interested in that, that's certainly worth seeking out.
I think I'll be doing that myself.
Yeah, it's a good movie. His screen career is quite an odd one. I suppose it's sometimes when you make a biopic of someone, you have to kind of take into account all of the indelible screen appearances they've made. I'll put it this way, I don't envy the person who has to make the authorized David Bowie film that you know is going to happen at some point. But Brown has not so many of those. He has some notable soundtracks. He did the soundtrack to Black Caesar, which is one of the tougher of the first wave of blaxploitation films in the 70s. He's had a very memorable cameo in the Blues Brothers, of course, and who should turn up here but Dan Aykroyd as his manager.
Yeah, Dan Aykroyd, what an actor.
I really enjoyed seeing him. I cannot remember the last time I'd seen Dan Aykroyd have a substantial role in a movie before this, and I was really cheered to see him. I think he brings something to that no one else could.
Yeah, absolutely, and actually, probably going back to what we mentioned at the very beginning about James Brown, the character showing empathy and being empathetic. It's probably that part of the film that you actually see some emotion, from James Brown, and from having to bury his a long-time friend as well as, yeah.
I think part of the reason why Aykroyd works in that role is that by that point you have seen Brown with Little Richard, who's played very well, I must say, by Brandon Michael Smith, and it is a fine attempt to imitate the inimitable, in my opinion. But Little Richard has warned him that, look, as soon as you get into the music industry, you're going to be surrounded by a lot of greedy white men who just want to rip you off sideways. And you listen to that and you think, yeah, he's right, but there's a part of you that as soon as Dan Aykroyd turns up, you think, maybe in his heyday you'd cast Dan Aykroyd to play a bastard, but now when he hasn't worked for so long, there is so much affection towards him. He carries such a nostalgic weight. You kind of feel reassured to see him as soon as he turns up, I think.
Yeah, he does. Because they obviously say that so early on, and then all of a sudden within a few scenes, that's exactly the position he finds himself in. So you're immediately mistrusting of everybody that he comes across, aren't you? You're like, oh, wait a minute, this is what's going to happen. It's written on the wall, and it was a pleasant surprise to learn and to find that actually the relationship was a very one of mutual respect, love, and probably as the scene of him burying Dan Aykroyd's character was going on, I was starting to think to myself, probably the only father figure James Brown ever had to a certain extent. Whether or not you could go that far as to say a father figure, but somebody, certainly a male to look up to.
I think there's something in it. Yeah, I mean, he's one of the few people in the music industry who thinks that James Brown can operate with greater creative control than other people are willing to give him, which is a running theme of the movie. And he, one of his positive aspects, one of the things that makes him a character you stay with, is that he is very savvy business-wise. When he explains how his records are promoted, I did sort of think, did James Brown invent the idea of going viral?
Yeah, what? There might be something in that, actually. Yeah. When he's talking about, even when we're talking about the promotion of his own concerts. So yeah, absolutely. Knowing the influencers at the time.
Exactly.
The radio stations. I'll get into the people that need it the most and want to know it the most. Ask the people on the streets, on the ground, to promote it and to spread the message. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of parallels that you can bring in there.
But that's the father, the actual father he has that you mentioned is played by Lenny James, very good British actor.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason why I like the childhood scenes so much is partly because I think they have a sense of like atmosphere and place that the rest of the movie doesn't really have, but also it is where the cast is at its most spectacular. I mean, you've got Viola Davis, who of course is also in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom as his mother. You've got Octavia Spencer as his aunt. I mean, it's kind of a problem that the people I most want to see Chadwick Boseman interact with are the people who were only really there for the start of the movie, for the childhood portions.
Yeah, and those childhood portions, you know how nonchalantly they had him pulling the shoes off of a hanging man,
Yes, yeah,
and saving those shoes until he was big enough to fit into them, you know, like they were his prized possession.
yeah.
Just little things like that that actually didn't get too much time when you compare the length of the film, but just really hit. There was some just real moments in those early scenes that just hit home. You know, the relationship between his mother and father, the scene that I just mentioned with the shoes, the boxing scene was absolutely
boxing scene is one of the few moments where I think the non-chronological style really worked, because that comes just after Little Richard's given him this warning.
Yeah.
And you see this crowd of white men arranging this really ghoulish kids boxing match where a lot of black kids beat each other up, and you think, finally a cut that makes sense.
Yes, yeah, added a bit of context, a bit of
absolutely
meat to the understanding of James Brown, the person, the man. Yeah, it was just a harrowing scene. It was really, I just found it very disturbing watching it, and knowing full, and I think it's because knowing full well that this is something that happened often and was seen as, you know, and especially because you have the band playing made up mainly of black males, and then you've got the, you know, like you say, just a bunch of white people overlooking this, and you know those band members having to watch young black children, you know, hit each other for sport and for fun, whilst they're supposed to be playing an upbeat, you know, jazzy tune. There was just something, and I think as well, actually, it was a really good scene because the music did not fit with the scene and the images that you were being shown. You know, and music has that effect, doesn't it? It has that effect to make you feel and have the mood in which the music is played in. So you're hearing the music at the beginning, it's nice and it's upbeat, it's lovely, and then you're seeing something you know, horrible unfold before your eyes as well, and you're conflicted immediately.
And some of the best uses of music in cinema history are the ones that are counterintuitive and are the ones that work against the more obvious emotional context of the scene. I mean, we mentioned Tarantino earlier. That's his career, basically. That's what he does. I did think that was terrific. I think there are things in it that are really good, but I think even when you are in the middle of a scene like that is really strong and really disturbing and really surprising and full of unexpected detail, you are always aware that you're going to get pulled out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that the movie's attitude towards what it sets up is very strange. It's like there's a whole bit with Tika Sumpter, who sort of comes on board the tour bus, and she's one of the backing singers. She's playing Yvonne Fair, and everyone speculates about how, James is going to be around her, and in real life he was, and she was the mother of one of his children, and she co-wrote I Got You, one of his signature songs. All of this I found out by looking it up, because after that one scene, I think Tika Sumpter is only just like in the background while people sing for a bit. There's no, it's a character that's given a massive build up and then it's just dropped. Whereas by contrast, Jill Scott as Dee Dee, his second wife, is just like thrown in there. It's like you've got used to one wife, and then he comes back home and it's like what, has his wife regenerated while he's out? What's happened?
Yeah. I couldn't agree more, because I was actually wondering what had happened. So somebody coming to it fresh and not really knowing too much about James Brown's life, and there is that scene when they come on the tour bus, and I'm thinking, right, okay, this is a main character. They've given some dedicated screen time to this person. I'm going to get to know this person and understand where they fit into James Brown's life. And I think straight after they go to being on stage, and he's singing a song, and he looks over to her, and she's giving the eyes back, and she's singing along as well. And then he falls over, looks up, and the camera pans to his second wife. And then from there on in, that's the one that you see. And you're thinking to yourself, well, what about her? What just happened, to that character? And afterwards, totally the same as yourself. I was just going, what happened? Did I miss something? There's something being entirely cut out. It seems like it's like there's maybe been about 20 minutes in there, and they've just gone, no, actually, we're going to have to cut that, but we can't leave this person out. So we'll just make a little nod to her.
Yeah, absolutely. And people, we were talking earlier about accuracy in films based on true events, and I know some people sort of look very askance at this practice of taking like 3 characters and merging them into one. Say, oh, why do you have to do that? It's like, well, this is why. Otherwise, the film just becomes a conveyor belt of important people coming on for one scene.
Yeah. It's a really good point, actually. It's a really good point, because it did more damage having that bit in there than it did if you wouldn't have had them in at all.
I hate that I'm arguing for a Tika Sumpter performance to hit the cutting room floor, because I think she's very underrated. She's very good in The Old Man and the Gun alongside Robert Redford and Sissy Spacek. But it's just a really distracting scene, and it never pays off or anything.
No, I know, and you start to think about how you had those little nods being taken out fully, and you just have him fall into you imagine the film him falling to the floor, looking at his wife that goes on to be a bit more in the film, and I think it would have made for a much better watching.
I suppose the general problem that I have is it's not just that these things go by fast. It's not just that the presentation is confusing, although, these are problems. It's that the cumulative effect is that I do not really know what Taylor and the Butterworths think about James Brown. Like, at a late stage, you see him getting into civil rights activism and recording Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, with like this really beaming bunch of black kids who are in African dress. And then it cuts to his backing band complaining that he's underpaying them. And I'm thinking, is that meant to undercut it? Is it meant to say that in private, James Brown sort of treats black people without the respect that he's... But I don't know, because these things just sort of crash into each other rather than build.
Yeah, there's no and normally with those things you'd maybe see the first shoots of a theme emerging, wouldn't you? And then you'd that confirms it as you then go through. But absolutely, I think they start and they stop in the moments that you've just described. That suggests this, and that is all we're going to say on that matter. And on this, we're going to show you this little snippet, and we're going to, and it could suggest this and it could suggest that, but actually we're not going to then reference it or do something along that theme in the rest of the film. And so, you come away from it and thinking, they could have built on that. They could have given us a little bit more.
Yeah.
For all with the end of getting to know James Brown, the person, the man.
I think his activism, I guess maybe the reason why they fudge it is that his political views were like hilariously all over the map in his real life. I think the most characteristic part of James Brown's political life was when he campaigned at the '68 election for Hubert Humphrey. And a lot of people in the civil rights movement were disappointed. They said, come on, this is a guy who's going to escalate the war in Vietnam. It's a guy who's dragged his heels on President Johnson's civil rights legislation. Why are you as a black man supporting him? So Brown then went and played Nixon's inauguration, which had them all going, when we said rethink what you're doing, we didn't mean do something even worse. That wasn't the path we intended.
Yeah, it was an area he should have never been near. You keep your genius in your own field. The Nixon stuff, and I think he actually went on to say that he ended up losing a lot of his black fans.
I don't think it's a coincidence that although his career was remarkably consistent and he never stopped touring and recording, that kind of early to mid 70s either was the real fallow point of his career. And of course, when you look at a funk musician, particularly one as influential as James Brown, you think the early to mid 70s weren't good for him. Really? What better time is there for funk music? So you think, there's something else going on here. And you're right, it probably was the Nixon stuff. Should we talk a bit generally about James Brown?
I think that'd be a great idea. It's something actually. Just before we started this, I thought I'm going to have to admit this. And what it is I came to this film knowing very little, if anything, about James Brown. I knew the name. I knew a handful of his songs, but that was it. And as the film went on, and like I've mentioned, I started to think, I want to know more. More than the film was almost giving me at times. I just wanted to read a little bit more about things. And so afterwards, I was doing some reading, and even from the film itself, just really made me quite embarrassed to not know that much about him. I kind of came away going, how can you consider yourself someone with a wide range of taste in music and then not know a great deal about James Brown? Because even just whilst I was, listening to songs in the film, listening to songs afterwards, I'm thinking I could hear different things. Like Red Hot Chili Peppers is one of my all-time favorite bands. I can hear some of the stuff that was in the film, and afterwards I can hear some of that in the Red Hot Chili Peppers songs. And then you're starting to think, how have you got to this stage with not knowing as that much about James Brown? And that was an interesting question for me.
It's funny, isn't it? I had a similar train of thought. I do like funk music a great deal. I think generally when I listen to 70s and 60s funk, I'm more likely to go for Betty Davis or Stevie Wonder than I am Brown. And I was trying to think about why that is, because that is strange, because when you think of funk music, you think of James Brown. He invented it. He's the biggest figure in it by a mile. I was trying to think of why that is. I think for me, it's because when I want to get into an artist, I want to listen to an album. I don't want to listen to a greatest hits compilation. I want an album. Right. And Betty Davis has some fantastic albums. Stevie Wonder, of course, has some of the most acclaimed albums ever made. James Brown was just never that much of an album artist, I think.
I can see that. I can see that, and there's something in it as well in that a lot of his work was honing in on the genre of funk music as well, wasn't it? It's not as if overnight he had the finished funk sound.
It's not like he went into his record company and went, now, this is going to sound kind of odd to you at first, but...
bear with me. Absolutely. So I think actually James Brown is much better listening to from beginning to end, and how that sound changes and how he tinkers with it, and how the music starts to change, and then starting to see, right, okay, I can see these bits in artist afterwards. You know, the Temptations. I absolutely love the Temptations, and you start to then see, some of the things that the Temptations have, and you can see the influence being drawn from James Brown, and I think actually you're right. As a he's got some great singles in there. As an album, you probably don't get the true genius that is James Brown unless you listen more chronologically as to how the sound evolved and went on.
And I think the other thing, I think there is a level of truth in that. I have a great soft spot for James Brown's ballads like Lost Someone or Please, 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 which is played in this film. And, that was obviously a part of his work that became less central as it goes on. The other thing that I would say is that I think the core of James Brown as an artist is really expressed live. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the one album he has that has that kind of sort of songs in the key of life, what's going on kind of reputation is Sex Machine, which is a double album and half of it is live. And that's where James Brown's genius really lives, when he's on stage.
Yeah, very good point, actually. That's one that I hadn't considered. Do you know what I found myself doing, actually? I found myself thinking of an artist, a very similar period, Elvis Presley, for example.
Who Brown was a huge fan of, by the way.
Yeah, I did see that as well. And I know about Elvis Presley and everything about him. I know his songs and all those type of things. And knowledge that wasn't gained through Googling or having a look. It's just that kind of knowledge that you pick up over the years, because everyone talks about him. Everyone still talks about him, and everyone talks about him in such glowing terms. And then I look at James Brown, who I think you could argue at the time was, as big and as influential in the music scene, creates this amazing genre of music in funk music, and is credited as being a massive influence in singers, songwriters from that time onwards. Most notably, Michael Jackson as well. When I was seeing James Brown, in the film, some of the moves, I'm thinking, that reminds me of Michael Jackson. And lo and behold, when I do some research, Michael Jackson names him as his biggest idol.
Yeah.
So then I was thinking, well, if that's the case, and I'm comparing these two musicians side by side, why is it that I grow up knowing of Elvis Presley and the things that go with Elvis Presley, but very little of James Brown?
It's funny that, isn't it? I think up until very recently, there just seemed to be some sort of transatlantic lag in terms of Black culture that wasn't there in terms of the mainstream. Like, we've mentioned Octavia Spencer. I remember hearing American friends talk about Fruitvale Station, which she is absolutely superb in, for about a year before I got the chance to see it over here. And I was thinking, if there was a similarly buzzed about American indie that starred Amy Adams or Julianne Moore, I would not have to sit on my ass for a year waiting to see that. And I think that is a very good point. That is only just being corrected. I think that it has only just got to this point where people have got rid of this stupid idea that people in this country need some sort of a translator for Black American culture. Yeah.
It's just so alien that you wouldn't get it otherwise. Ridiculous. But I think there was something in that. I think that there is something in. Rolling Stones, for example, put him at number 7, I think, in the greatest all-time artists. I think it is.
Right.
And so I saw that last night, and I'm thinking to myself, how do I get to 30 years old, and only through watching Get On Up do I see James Brown and actually get an interest and start to dig a little bit deeper. I should, from somebody as influential as he was to music, being exposed to that type of thing naturally, as I was, say, Elvis Presley.
I think the other thing, and it's the thing that kind of affects Elvis, although he managed to break through it a bit, is that in the 50s and early 60s, artists' albums were churned out on such a production line that usually you've got like an album of good material that is spread over about 3 different albums that were released within 15 months of each other, and it's just a ridiculous work rate. Some people managed to break through it, you know. Marvin Gaye, the Beach Boys, they managed to get off that treadmill and make things that they could be more precise and artistically controlling over. But for James Brown, I don't think that was kind of really the point. I think, to go back to my earlier point, he would rather have the biggest tour of the year than have an album that, you know, Rolling Stone would put on their #1 of the year.
Yeah, feeding off the. I get the impression he used to feed off the audience, feed off the acoustics of the place he was playing in, and you know, just all of that kind of just added to the energy of his performance.
The other thing about his legacy that we haven't discussed is what an extraordinary influence he had on the birth of hip hop. Because I'm currently reading Can't Stop, Won't Stop, A History of the Hip Hop Generation by Jeff Chang, which is firstly a fantastic book of social history. Like, even if you don't have any interest in any of the artists discussed there, it's such a great book about race and society in America over this kind of 1970s to 1990s period. But the thing that it emphasizes is that it wasn't really until hip hop had been around for a few years that anyone got the idea of creating a rap record. Originally, it was a live format. It was about DJs mixing together tracks in an unusual way. Maybe occasionally, you know, someone would rap over the top of it, but it wasn't the focus of it. And of course, that presents a problem, because if you've invented a genre, there aren't really many discs that you can spin that fit into that category. So they often used to go to James Brown, and they went back to James Brown so much that one of the pioneers of hip hop, Curtis Blow, said "Give It Up or Turn It Loose" by James Brown is the national anthem of hip hop. It's like the absolute cornerstone of it, even though it itself is not a hip hop record. It was absolutely unthinkable to have a block party in New York in the 70s and not have that record on.
just the must have at any such party. A bit like you'd go to a wedding and have My Way always on, or something like that.
It had this weird effect too. In Clyde Stubblebine, his drummer, who is like briefly seen in this film, had probably the most famous moment of improvisation in musical history on one of Brown's B-sides. There is a James Brown B-side called The Funky Drummer, which, as the name suggests, is mostly a showpiece for Clyde Stubblebine. And there is a particular drum solo that he does towards the end, which, once rap started to get out of the block parties and started to become an album medium and a single medium, people who were looking for a good beat to sample and rap over really fell on that. They realized that you could loop this thing and it sounded like hip hop before hip hop existed. The only problem was that at the time sampling existed in this complete legal limbo. So I assume it's changed now, but for like the first 3 or 4 years of this happening, Stubblebine wasn't actually seeing any money from it, despite the fact that you could like turn on any urban radio station in America and you'd be hearing his drumming more likely than not.
Yeah, and that goes toward, is James Brown referred to as the most sampled artist?
He is, yes.
Ever.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that, and you can believe it. Yeah,
just from what you're saying there, absolutely. I can imagine he's I think there's many a song where he's sampled on, and I think even towards the latter end of his career, he did some work with artists, you know, doing some duets and things like that.
Yeah, it's an amazing career and it produced some amazing music. And I have to say, in the final analysis, without the music and a lot of the cast, the film would just not have worked at all. But I think they combined to keep it about afloat.
Yes, yeah, I would agree. You know, Chadwick as an absolutely great lead that you are drawn into throughout, and the music and just general interest in James Brown's story, the person that you know as one thing, and understanding where he came from and his roots. Yeah, that's what pulls it through. The rest of it,
Yeah,
is a little bit wishy, isn't it?
Well, that's about it from Pop Screen this week. But just a reminder that if you subscribe to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show, among the many other goodies you can get is a monthly bonus episode. Until next week, that's been your lot from Pop Screen. I've been Graham.
I've been Ben.
And we'll see you later.